Welcome to the Political Idiots. I'm Carl Thompson.
And I'm Don Cole. Welcome to the show.
Doomsday. Is it closer than it was yesterday? Per the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, it sure is. On Thursday, January 26th, 2017, the Bulletin released its annual update to the Doomsday Clock to reflect the current time to midnight, the hypothetical apocalypse. According to the Bulletin, we are now 2.5 minutes to midnight, 30 seconds closer than we were last year. This is the closest to midnight the Bulletin has placed the clock since 1953, when it was 2 minutes to midnight. In October of 52, the U.S. had conducted its first successful test of a thermonuclear device, with the Russians conducting a successful test of their H-bomb 9 months later. This issued in a new era of nuclear threats and a possible destruction of the Western world. Ever since the introduction of the nuclear weapons technologies, the human civilization has lived with the possibility of the annihilation from the use of such weapons. Since the end of the Cold War and the signing of the Partial Test Ban Treaty in 1963 and the 1996 Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, though not yet ratified by the United States Congress and 7 other Annex II countries, the world has had a consensus view of reducing the stockpiles of nuclear weapons and prohibiting the proliferation of such technology. However, as the Bulletin points out, the world is starting to slide backwards, and from that slide reemerge in a possible era of new arms races. The Bulletin observed, quote, "The progress in reducing the overall threat of nuclear war has stalled, and in many ways gone backwards. Over the past 2 years, Russia has begun to modernize its nuclear weapons program, including new silos, train-mounted missiles, and new submarines. In response, the United States has started to emerge on its own decades-long plan to modernize its own programs, bringing into question the commitment of the United States and Russia to the continued support of promoting disarmament between the two countries and around the world. The new U.S. President, Donald Trump, has shown relative disregard during the presidential campaign to the U.S. commitment to disarmament and nonproliferation. Mr. Trump said during an interview on April 3rd with Fox News, quote, "In many ways, and I say this, in many ways, the world is changing. Right now, you have Pakistan, and you have North Korea, and you have China, and you have Russia, and you have India, and you have the United States, and many other countries have nukes." He added later in regards to the question on Japan and South Korea having nukes, quote, "Maybe they would be better off, including, yes, nukes. Yes, including with nukes." This statement and similar ones made by the then candidate Donald Trump place serious doubts in the civilized world on his commitment to continue with nonproliferation and disarmament now that he is president. The Bulletin also points out that the continued strife between Pakistan and India over the Kashmir province and the continued tests from North Korea pose an external threat that remains high. It also points out that the unwillingness shown by President Trump to take experts' advice poses a high degree of risk. Though public policy is never made in the absence of politics, the Bulletin notes, quote, "Good policy takes account of politics, but it is never made in the absence of expertise. Facts are indeed stubborn things, and they must be taken into account if the future of humanity is to be preserved long term." The main question remains: how will the U.S. lead the world when it comes to nuclear weapons? Will it continue to strive for nuclear disarmament, or will it fall back into the nationalist ideology of preservation first at any cost? Only time will tell. Don, what are your thoughts on this particular topic and the Bulletin's report?
Well, Carl, my particular thoughts on this topic are that modernizing a nuclear arsenal is not a terrible idea. Not an expansion, mind you, but a simple upgrade. As I'm sure you are aware, Carl, maybe some of our audience is not, has not seen that some of the controls used for our nuclear arsenal have been updated since the 1970s or 80s. John Oliver did a piece on HBO about this, and it was very eye-opening to me about the state of our nuclear arsenal. This can lead to all kinds of problems in communication and the ability to actually use our nuclear arsenal. The expansion of nuclear armament, however, is a terrible idea. Nuclear armaments are the thing that keep people awake at night. They are the one thing right now that we could actually kill ourselves using. So the proliferation of nuclear devices I completely disagree with. I do agree with upgrading our arsenal. This leads me to another point that I have about a nuclear arsenals expanding and the upgrading of these is that countries such as Pakistan and India, North Korea, and these other countries do not have the same chain of command that the United States does. The United States has a very severe chain of command that you do not disrupt, and it makes it a lot easier to convey orders when they come down, which makes our nuclear arsenal the safest probably in all the world. Not that safe nuclear weapons, not that there is such a thing. But other countries such as Pakistan and Korea and North Korea do not have this, and this leads to problems with orders being miscommunicated, or even the potential to have nuclear weapons stolen by either rogue government officials or just rogue people in general. Those are the only points I have to add. I think the clock the clock itself is kind of an overhyped thing. However, what it points to with the nuclear proliferation and climate change are very real problems that we face, especially with this incoming administration and the feeling around the world currently. What do you think?
Well, one of the things that I would say, as far as the idea of overhyped, I think a lot of it speaks to the concern. Hyping becomes an idea. It's the idea of the greatest possibility of possible annihilation that we do face, and keeping in mind that the clock takes into consideration many other things besides just U.S. and Russia. It takes into consideration North Korea. It takes into consideration all the other advancements that are going on. Now, one of the things that I would say, though, in an interesting rebuke to the idea of definitely modernization, I don't necessarily disagree that we have to make sure that our current stockpiles are safe. But one of the things that I worry about with the idea of the modernization of the nuclear weapons and the modernization of our nuclear stockpiles by both the Russians and the United States is that sets off a tit for tat need of an arms race challenge. Now, it may not necessarily increase the number that we have, but it's not going to decrease the number. Hopefully it will. Hopefully the idea is that we can both come to an agreement that we need to keep these weapons safe as we have them while continuing to reduce the number of stockpiles that we have, considering the factor that right now the US and Russia account for 90% of all nuclear arsenal in the world. The other things that's interesting, just on note of 2013, there were 10,215 nuclear weapons in thousands, by the way. So that's actually that's up there. So that's a lot of nuclear weapons between the two particular countries. So when you look at what's going on there, it's an area where we need to ensure that we reduce the amount of nuclear weapons that are out there and modernize at the same time. My question is whether or not the two countries can agree to that. I also think that there's a lot of emergence and a lot of challenge of how do we lead on the idea of Korea in the northern and North Korea. We continue to keep them isolated. We've continued to say we're going to leave them over there. But as we don't engage with them, all they've done is found ways to continue to develop their nuclear weapons. So how do we make sure that that particular rogue actor gets brought back into the fold and we put pressure on them? Do we see that coming out of the United States? The United States has tried for a period of time, as well as Russia, to try to make sure that we're keeping the world away from devastation. Where do we think that this administration might be going with that particular approach?
Well, I would say that this particular administration is going with the approach of give South Korea and Japan nuclear weapons, and it not only threatens North Korea with retaliation, but it also threatens China with retaliation, and that goes for what you were saying before with a tit for tat possibility of escalation on nuclear armament instead of disarmament. And I have to say that North Korea is so far off the rails that I'm not entirely certain that they can be brought back in without a certain amount of force. I'm not 100% on that, but I think the only way to bring them back in without some force is probably through China. And if China can somehow bring North Korea to heel, but we would obviously have to have China's help on that. And right now, this administration is not in the mood to negotiate with China on anything, let alone North Korea.
Sure. Now, one of the things, though, as you had mentioned there about the idea of with Donald Trump saying, hey, I want to let these other two allies have the bomb, that goes in contrary to both you and I agreeing on the idea, and probably many of our viewers agreeing on the idea, that proliferation is a problem. If two new countries join the nuclear club, if you will, then that is not anti-proliferation. That there itself is the spread and increase of nuclear weapons. So that is an area where I believe the vast majority of us out there would disagree on.
We would disagree with this administration. The only comments Trump has actually stated, President Trump now has actually stated on the matter, have been during his campaign, and we have to wait and see. He hasn't signed any executive orders on this one yet. There have been a lot of those. So we don't know exactly what his plan is going to entail, and that's part of the scary part, because the only thing we have is during the campaign that he said that proliferation was not a bad idea. So we need more information. We need more context on what he's actually going to do. So far, he's been following through on what he said during the campaign, which leads me to believe that more proliferation is entirely possible with him.
And that I think is the dangerous spot. You can say we don't know what he's going to do, but we've seen, and one of the things that I find so interesting, we go back and we look at even some of his handlers saying, well, don't take him literally. I think we better start taking him literally. Because everything that he's mentioned about through his campaign so far as things he's done in some form or fashion, all within the first 7 days of his actual administration. So that is an interesting thing as we continue to look at it. One of the other things that becomes challenging that I think with the idea of reducing nuclear stockpiles is we have to remember that a lot of these areas, these materials are the things that could get into rogue actors. Now, don't get me wrong, as you stated before, the U.S. does have a decently secure chain of command. So does the Russians. But what gets me a little bit more challenged about modernization, and I'll point this out there too with any type of cyber attacks or any type of hacking, a lot of the older technology, don't get me wrong, is old, but it's also not as susceptible to hacking because it's not necessarily on the same grids as we work on today. So it's an interesting other layer that we'll have to make sure is out there while we modernize and be careful. But one of the things that's interesting too, we look through the years of 2010 through 2015, in the US alone, there have been 14 types of nuclear material that have been lost. There's been 8 that have been delivered by failure, or that have had a delivery failure. We've also seen 27 things of nuclear material stolen. That's just in the United States alone. We had 58 actual incidents of lost theft or other things in the United States through a 5-year period. That's alarming. Now that's us. Now we have the most. We don't have any information on Russia. You almost wonder if there's too much out there and we're not working to take down our stockpiles. When is somebody going to get a hold of something, and it's not going to be the main actors that blow us all up, but it's going to be a rogue entity that blows us all up?
Well, the one thing I will say about the problem that we face, the world in fact actually faces this problem, is we have all this radioactive material, but we're not using it. And it's just sitting there. And we want to get rid of it, but you can't just get rid of nuclear material, as you well know, and I'm sure our audiences well knows that each of these things has a half-life of so many years just to get rid of half of it. So getting rid of it is a terribly complex and just all-around hard thing to do. It's not to say it shouldn't be done. I'm just saying that there's going to end up being more to it than simply saying, oh, well, we don't want these anymore. We got to get rid of them, because you can't just get rid of nuclear materials. There are very special precautions for that. Um, the one thing I will also say is that the problems that we've had with losing or stuff getting stolen, like we're dealing with humans. Humans make mistakes, and it's even in the best system there's going to be mistakes made, and that makes it even worse in the lower places such as Pakistan, India, and North Korea that have even worse procedures than we do. Honestly, I don't know what else there is to be said about it other than we really don't want nuclear proliferation around the world, and if we could, I imagine a lot of us would like to see nuclear weapons gone entirely, so we just wouldn't have to worry about that. But that's not going to happen. That's not practical.
Well, and I don't know if it's not practical. I think there's definitely areas where we need to reduce stockpiles. One of the things, just to end off where we're at today, and what my particular stance and what I hope, and I think what a lot of us would hope for the new administration, is that we work hand in hand with Russia and as a community at the United Nations as a whole to reaffirm the idea of reducing our stockpiles, showing some goodwill out there of reducing the number of warheads that we have active. You're correct. There's going to be challenges with with disassembling them, with getting rid of nuclear material. Those things do take time. But there's a lot of areas where we have to make sure that there's a consensus behind it, and we have to work under this administration and through the United States through leadership and to show that we're going to move forward with those. And the only thing I would say is that words have consequences, and we need to make sure and we need to hope that our elected officials know that about the world and about this one area. So, in conclusion, tell us your thoughts. Obviously, there's a whole lot of things that are out there on this. There's a whole scary area that does come into play that really is an important topic of conversation, I think, in today. So, leave us your comments below. Share with us what your thoughts are. And we look forward to seeing you on the next installment of the Political Idiots. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.